Thanks for joining us. I'm Catherine Crier. Frank Says No is off today. Declaring our changed world is a more hopeful world, President Bush and the leaders of the Security Council nations meet to define the United Nations mission in a post-Cold War world. The president followed the session with a controversial meeting with China's leader Li Peng. CNN's Charles Bierbauer is with the president in New York and joins us now with details. Charles?
Catherine, it was when the formal Security Council summit ended that the president still had one more somewhat awkward piece of business to attend to. The president met with the Chinese Prime Minister, Mr. Li Peng, and this is at a time when U.S. relations with China have been strained because of China's human rights conditions. In a stern address to the Security Council, Li Peng said China's approach to human rights is no one else's business. At the start of the meeting, President Bush averted questions about China, but said he would reiterate the U.S.'s well-known position to Li Peng. The Chinese had asked for this meeting, and the White House acquiesced to 15 minutes at the end of the day, setting it apart from his other meetings, friendlier sessions with other leaders here. For the rest of the day, the tone was at times congratulatory, but always rather sober. President Bush put the New World euphoria aside to remind the Security Council of unresolved troubles. The UN demands that Libya hand over 2 Libyans indicted in the U.S. and Britain for the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103.
Terrorists and their state sponsors must know there will be serious consequences if they violate international law.
The U.S. is contemplating a new resolution that would include economic sanctions against Libya. Though there was unprecedented UN cooperation in last year's effort in the Persian Gulf, there is still unfinished business.
We must continue to focus on Iraq's capability to build or maintain weapons of mass destruction.
Bush was not alone in his concern about the danger of arms proliferation. French President Mitterrand and Russian President Yeltsin called for further nuclear reductions. Yeltsin's proposal, a 2,000 warhead ceiling, goes even deeper than Bush's at about 4,500 strategic warheads.
And tomorrow, in my meeting with President Yeltsin, we will continue the search for common ground on this vitally important issue. He responded with some very serious proposals just the other day.
U.S. officials say they want to hear Yeltsin's idea about a global security shield. It is a Russian reincarnation of Ronald Reagan's offer to share SDI technology. Bush is full of praise for Russia's reversal of over 70 years of communism, but the U.S. still has problems with China. The U.S. is waiting for China's Li Peng to meet his commitment to stop China's export of missile technology to such countries as Pakistan and Syria. But the message to Li Peng stems more from his order to crush the 1989 student demonstrations in Beijing.
The will of the majority must never degenerate into the whim of the majority. This fundamental principle transcends all borders. Human dignity, the inalienable rights of man, these are not the possessions of the state.
Despite the quick dismissal of Li Peng, President Bush still intends to do business with China, but Boris Yeltsin has Bush's attention right now, and U.S. officials are anticipating a full-scale Bush-Yeltsin summit later in the spring. Charles Bierbauer, CNN, live from New York.
Thanks, Charles. It was 3 decades ago, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev banged his shoe on a UN podium in an outburst that drove home the confrontation of the Cold War. Today, a decidedly different spirit at the United Nations. Boris Yeltsin, the man who's assumed Khrushchev's mantle of leadership, stood side by side with the other leaders of the Security Council nations. It was an unprecedented spirit of cooperation for an unprecedented Security Council summit. Here's CNN's Charles Feldman.
You want pomp? You want circumstance? Nothing like a first-ever gathering of world leaders for a United Nations summit to produce enough of both to last a lifetime. For those diplomats here who suggest that the summit was just a very big photo opportunity to enhance the reputations of leaders back home, there were plenty of photo opportunities. But for those who argue that the summit served a significant purpose, introducing the United Nations to the so-called New World Order, there were also plenty of speeches trying to define just what role the UN should play as we near the 21st century. Both the French president and the British prime minister talked about the UN's changing role in helping liberty develop around the world and in providing collective security.
We should send a clear signal that it's through the United Nations and its Security Council that we intend to deal with threats to international peace and security.
La liberté a grandi dans le monde.
Liberty has grown in the world. We have to continue to help it.
For Boris Yeltsin, the UN summit was sort of a coming-out party, putting him shoulder to shoulder with fellow world leaders. The Russian president, assuming the seat on the Security Council formerly occupied by the extinct Soviet Union, clearly had the proposed U.S. Star Wars nuclear defense system on his mind. Yeltsin proposes a global defense system that incorporates Russian technology.
I think the time has come to consider creating a global defense system for the world community. It could be based on a reorientation of the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative to make use of high technologies developed in Russia's defense complex.
Throughout the summit, Western leaders peppered their speeches with references to democracy and human rights. Some here believe these were not too subtle rebukes aimed at China because of its crackdown on the democracy movement in that country. And so diplomats here were more than eager to hear what China's premier had to tell the world body. When the Chinese premier finally spoke, he told other countries, in effect, to butt out of China's internal affairs.
The new international order should be established on the basis of the principles of mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, mutual non-aggression, non-interference in each other's internal affairs.
With the myopia of instant analysis, it is impossible to tell whether the summit is a turning point for the United Nations or just one giant photo opportunity for world leaders. That judgment must await the 2020 hindsight of historians. Charles Feldman, CNN, at the United Nations.
The U.S. issued a critical assessment of China's human rights policy today, just 1 hour before President Bush met with China's Prime Minister Li Peng. The State Department's annual human rights report called China's human rights practices, quoting now, repressive, falling far short of internationally accepted norms. Mr. Li denied the allegations in a speech at the UN. The State Department also criticized Kuwait, Syria, Iraq, Cuba, and Haiti, and to a lesser degree, Israel and the Palestinians. Among the stories coming up on the world today, yet another major U.S. airline asks for federal bankruptcy protection from creditors, and Congress reacts to consumer complaints about the skyrocketing cost of cable television.
Some days you just can't lose. Wanna live, wanna spread the news. Some days you feel so good. Gotta smile, gotta knock on wood.
A great day calls for a great beer. The Michelob beers, with its smooth, classic taste you don't find every day.
Michelob, some days. Michelob, some days. Michelob, some days are better than others.
One of the cleanest sources of electricity we have. A source that doesn't burn anything and so doesn't pollute the air. A source that emits no greenhouse gases and helps preserve our natural resources is nuclear energy.
How can you tell a raisin nut from an ordinary raisin? Raisin nuts shop in big and tall shops. They are frequently mistaken for dirigibles, and they have a heck of a time hiding behind trees. But the best way to spot a raisin nut is to taste one, because when you take a fat, juicy raisin and roll it in a nutty coating, it keeps it plumper, makes it extra tasty. The toasted bran flakes and big crunchy almonds help too. For big-time raisin taste, it's Raisin Nut Bran.
I can't remember. It was something new.
Nicoderm, nicotine transdermal system.
Yeah, it's called Nicoderm.
Oh, yeah, the patch. Nicoderm, huh?
Yeah, it's a patch.
Nicoderm, nicotine transdermal system.
The Murine Earwax Removal System has drops that safely loosen hardened wax when used as directed, plus an ear washer to gently flush wax away. Murine, the complete medically approved system to safely remove earwax.
Cable TV rates, they're on the rise, and it appears national lawmakers are ready to take action. The Senate took a giant step today toward regulating the cable industry. CNN's Carl Rochelle has details.
Complaints by cable TV users about increasing rates for decreasing service have grown almost as fast as the number of channels on cable systems. Friday, the U.S. Senate showed it was listening.
The public is outraged at the present state of affairs. The public wants something done, and the public wants something real done, not something cosmetic.
The Senate passed a bill that would require the Federal Communications Commission to establish national guidelines for quality of service and regulating basic cable rates.
In 1986, my constituents paid $12 for 30 channels. $12 for 30 channels. Today, they pay $12.95, but not for 30 channels, but for 14 channels.
The bill would also require the FCC to regulate unreasonable price increases for special programming like movie channels or sporting events, set standards for customer service, and promote competition by preventing local governments from keeping second cable distributors out of a market. Critics charge the regulation would stunt the growth of a still developing industry.
I fear we're going to shoot the goose that laid the golden egg. Regulation and re-regulation is never the answer.
But Senator Al Gore says it's not a question of development or programming, it's a question of money.
The real question here is not what's happening. We know what's happening. They're taking advantage of their monopoly power to charge as much money as they possibly can.
The cable TV industry disagrees.
In fact, cable provides a good product for a relatively reasonable price. We would be the first to acknowledge that in some areas, rate increases have been unreasonable. On the whole, though, the price per channel for cable has simply followed inflation, and the 55 million people who subscribe to cable can't be all wrong.
The Senate bill now goes to the House, which is expected to pass it. But President Bush has already threatened to veto the cable regulation bill. Critics say a presidential veto would send a signal to cable companies that raising rates is okay. Carl Rochelle, CNN, Capitol Hill.
TWA today became the 6th major U.S. airline in recent years to ask for federal bankruptcy protection from creditors. But TWA Chairman Carl Icahn promises it will be business as usual at the airline. Union leaders agree, but still worry about the airline's future.
The employees will have their jobs. The airline will continue to operate. Tickets will be honored, etc. The question is the longer term. The short term, there's not a problem for the employees. There's not a problem for the communities we serve or our passengers. The question is the longer term. Will it solve the longer term problems of TWA?
But Icahn says he's confident the move will make TWA stronger and a more competitive airline. TWA joins Continental Airlines and America West in Chapter 11. Eastern, Pan American, and Midway Airlines had been in Chapter 11, but all folded last year. Another round of government figures shows an economy dead in the water. The government's index of leading economic indicators sank 0.3% in December. Home sales fell too, 6.6%. In 1991, home sales fell more than 5.5% to their lowest level in 9 years. So far for 1992, the housing industry seems to be off to a strong start. CNN's Pat Etheridge reports.
Mark and Lisa Randolph are taking that big step, buying into the American dream.
You can't live in fear. If that's the case, Mark and I probably still be in an apartment and renting.
That's a boost for the construction industry, hard hit by recession.
At this time last year, I couldn't find a job. There's just no jobs to be had anywhere.
The market is much better now, and we anticipate it being better throughout the year.
The optimism is fueled by lower interest rates and lower prices.
This is one of the best times to buy a house that we've seen in a long period of time.
Volatile interest rates have people scrambling to refinance and lock in home loans.
You have situations where a customer may be calling in the morning to make an appointment to come and see you, and by the time they get there in the afternoon, the interest rates have gone up.
The president's proposed tax credit for first-time buyers is another incentive.
This is a very effective, targeted type of policy that's going to get some more people into homes, maybe a little earlier than they might have otherwise during a time when the economy is weak.
But it doesn't help those who are trying to move up.
I think he needs to go a step further and
offer that to everybody. It definitely will help us out.
And without that move-up market, the higher end of the housing market can't get moving?
And because it generates so many different jobs, a healthy housing industry is considered a key in rebounding from recession.
1991 was the worst year for the housing industry since World War II. 1992 is clearly off to a stronger start. The question now is whether this recent spurt of building and buying will last long enough to play a significant role in economic recovery. Pat Etheridge, CNN Atlanta.
And still to come on The World today, another tough round in the rape trial of former heavyweight champ Mike Tyson. His accuser takes the stand for a second day.
Usually, when you send flowers out of town, you give the order to somebody who takes a cut. Then he passes the order to somebody else who takes a cut. But now there's Flowers Direct that actually lets you speak to a florist in the town where you're sending the flowers. Flowers Direct, or We Cut, is the middleman. Call Flowers Direct now, 1-800-621-2121.
There's lots of ways to have garlic.